Okay, good afternoon everybody, and a really warm welcome to this Research Hive seminar on working with publishers to create a popular textbook. I'm delighted to welcome two very distinguished speakers to our session. Professor Raymond Field, who's Professor of Child's Anthropology here at Sussex, and also Mark Kavanagh, who is Executive Publisher at SciFi Publications. So we're each going to speak for 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions and hopefully answers for both of them at the end. And then to Andy.
Right, I'm going to begin with a trailer so that I can try to compose myself for the fact that I'm going to have to speak to you. That's assuming the video works, obviously. It's probably no sound, isn't it? Doesn't matter. Looks pretty. There's a very nice fake American accent going on over the top. Was it fake?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a guess. So this is the trailer for the book, which if you could hear what was being said would really, really nicely introduce you to what it is. But as you can't, it won't. So maybe I'll just skip it. So what I'm going to do is try to explain to you how this, I mean, it feels kind of weirdly premature to be talking about how to produce a successful textbook, because I don't think we've got any evidence that this actually is a successful textbook. So it's more about how to create a textbook. And I'm going to talk about the how it happened, how it came about that I ended up doing this, and then a bit about what it takes to do it, which is my way of trying to put you off of ever writing a textbook. And then there's probably some stuff at the end about something or other. And then Mark's going to drag out some contracts for you all to sign, I assume, later on. So I want to start with a quote from a guy called Edward Tufte, who's a data visualization guru and a very good sculptor as well, apparently. And he's a lot more famous than I am and a lot more quotable. And he apparently has a post-it note stuck to his computer monitor that says, if you're not doing something different, you're not doing anything at all. And this struck me as a good quote for this project because it is different, which doesn't necessarily mean it's good, but it is different. So, maybe in some kind of weird cosmic way, Professor Tufte's post-it note somehow drifted into my consciousness at some point. The reality is a little more bland than that, which is that this whole project kind of came about because in 2008 I went on sabbatical to Rotterdam to update my SPSS textbook. I was updating to the 3rd edition at the time, and I'd taken 2 suitcases to Rotterdam with me. One of them was full of clothes and the other one was full of my mass disappointment with the previous edition of the SPSS book. So I had lots of ideas about what I wanted to do, what I wanted to change, which is pretty much standard when you come to do new editions of books. You've had like 4 years to realise all the things that you hate about what you did before. And beautifully, you get the chance to change them, unlike if you're writing a fictional story or something. Imagine those of you that have done your PhDs being able to go back to your PhD and do it properly. It's a very liberating experience. So I went over to Rotterdam and I wanted to do something kind of radical-ish. And I was sitting on a tram one day and I just had this kind of quite random thought of, wouldn't it be really, because a lot of what I try to do in textbooks is, because statistics is a subject that most people don't really like learning, and in psychology, my discipline, it's kind of the topic that students get forced to learn that they don't really want to learn, and so there's a lot of trying to get them engaged, trying to use examples that are kind of funny or smutty normally, and stuff like that. But I was thinking, how can I engage students? And the answer came to me in a flash, which was, wouldn't it be kind of fun to have a fictional narrative or some kind of narrative going through the book? So at various points you'd be taken out of the statistical hell that you're in into some slightly more pleasant land where your brain could kind of reset itself, ready for the kind of next bit. It's a bit like having a bit of bread between courses of a meal, except the meal is rotting maggots. So anyway, the problem was I had 6 months to update this. There was no way, I've never written any fiction I haven't now, but I hadn't then. So it kind of wasn't going to happen. The only story that I really had was my own life, which, trust me, is not an interesting story. But I thought, nevertheless, I'll chuck some of that in. So what I ended up doing was what I call a cop-out, was bookending chapters with little anecdotes about my life that I very tenuously linked to the content of the chapter. So it starts off, I mean, it's all very kind of linear. It starts off, I'm born in chapter 1, and in chapter 20, it ends up that I get married. So, there's a nice little narrative that hopefully provides some light relief. But it always felt like a cop-out. It always felt like not quite what I wanted to do, but, something approximating it very badly. Then a few years later, I got a phone call from Wiley. I'm allowed to say their name, am I? I got a phone call from Wiley, and they had this Dummies series that you probably all heard of. And they said, we want you to write a Stats for Dummies book. And I was kind of tempted because, it's a big brand and everything. But, there's, potential conflicts with other books. So I spoke to my editor at the time at Sage and said, look, Wiley want me to do this. I'm kind of keen to do it. How about it? Sort of went a bit silent at the other end of the phone. And then, out of the blue, the head of the London office of Sage, Ziad, phoned me. And, weirdly, Ziad actually signed me up for the first edition of the SPSS book because, we are that old that he was an editor then, rather than running the whole London office. So I've known him for a very, very long time. So, in a sense, it's not that unusual that he would phone me, but it's fairly unusual. But, nevertheless, a rare and beautiful thing when Ziad phoned you. I say that tentatively because generally I hate phone calls for interacting with people. So, it was good. So anyway, what Ziad said to me, in a nutshell, was don't write the book for Wiley, they're a bunch of arseholes. Write it for Sage. And I said, okay, why? And he said, because we will let you do whatever you want to do. You have complete freedom to do anything. I thought, fair enough. Sounds like a good offer. What he was essentially offering me was the opportunity to kind of follow my heart and not my head, do whatever weird and wonderful things, and if it happened to bankrupt Sage in the process, he was prepared to take that risk. So, I thought, well, if you're not doing anything different, you're not doing anything at all, so let's go for it. So what did I want to do? Well, like I said, I wanted to kind of embed a narrative into the story, into the textbook. And I thought, because I quite like comics and stuff, I thought it would be quite cool to get someone to do like little graphic novel panels to drive the story along. Had fairly little faith in my ability to drive the story along with my own writing, so I thought having some pretty pictures would be pretty good. So I managed to recruit this guy James, who actually we look very similar in that photo. We're not actually twins. We're not online, as it were. And he's a storyboard artist for Doctor Who, which is one of my favourite TV shows, so that kind of got him a shoe-in for the job, really, relative to everyone else. And he was magnificent throughout, it has to be said. So there's James. And what I ended up doing was creating a kind of sci-fi love story. So over the next couple of years after signing this contract with Sage, it has taken quite a long time for this to all happen. Over about 2 years, I sort of collected ideas, had a notebook, wrote stuff down, and ended up in this sort of futuristic world where essentially society has collapsed because of something called a reality prism, which split reality into the subjective and the objective. Ultimately, what that meant is that everyone could see reality for what it was. There was no spin, no being told things that were not true. You could see reality, which might seem like a good thing, but unfortunately it made society collapse, because if you could actually see all your own flaws and everything, you don't bother trying to do anything at all. So society collapses, and then it starts to build up again into this kind of weird world that's very futuristic on the one hand, but also very old-fashioned in the other hand, because there's a sort of generation of people harking back to the good old days before technology kind of ruined society. So it's a bit like me. It's a mixture of modern and someone hankering over the good old times of clockwork. That's the kind of backstory for everything. And within this, there's this young generation of people. The reality prisms have all been sort of banished because of the effect that they had. And there's this young generation of people never seen a reality prism, don't know any, they've heard of it as kind of a legend, but they are growing up with all the kind of aspirations and weird and wacky egotistical beliefs that you need to sort of try and think that you can make a difference to the world. So, their parents' generation, all their hopes and aspirations were destroyed by knowing, the truth of everything, and this young generation are kind of much more able to kind of live on the idea of that they can change the world. So into this, I had a main character, Zach. He's a rock musician. It was important that he wasn't a scientist because he is essentially the student working through the book. And he is unconfident about his academic ability. He wants to change the world through his music. He's a really, really good musician. His band is doing really, really well in this kind of new world. But he's scared of science. He doesn't really understand it. He doesn't get it. He not necessarily dropped out early at school, but or at college, but he didn't really have a passion for it. On the other hand, his girlfriend of 10 years, Alice Nightingale, is, a scientist on a kind of stellar trajectory. She's a geneticist. Her whole world is about science and evidence and empiricism. And in a way, they're two very conflicting personalities, because he's all about feeling and gut instinct, and she's all about evidence and practice. And like I said, they've been together 10 years, and one day she vanishes. So he wakes up, there's a song playing over and over again that has some kind of significance to the pair of them from when they got together. But she is gone, and she's been wiped from the face of the earth. And he's quite distraught about this. So what he does is, he tries to find her. So all he has to begin with is this thing called a reality checker, which is it's a bit like a fancy Google or Wikipedia. It's basically like a highly sarcastic, piss-taking piece of tech that he can ask questions to, and may or may not give him the right answer depending on how he's feeling. So he has the reality checker to help him, and along the way he meets a bunch of weird and wacky characters. So he goes on this sort of essential mission. There's loads of weird stuff happening. People in society are dropping down with memory loss. He doesn't really know what that's all about. He keeps getting messages from this person called Milton, who turns out to be a physics professor in the shape of a sarcastic ginger cat. He doesn't know what Milton's all about. This guy, Rob Nutcock, keeps popping up everywhere. He raids, Zach raids Alice's therapist's office and finds a load of files, and this word jigsaw keeps coming up, and it turns out to be that this sort of big secretive corporation somewhere. I need to stop hitting the screen here. This guy Rob Nutcock keeps appearing in his life, and he talks really, really weird, so he doesn't know what that's all about. Milton keeps talking about this character Rodiger. He doesn't know what the deal is there, who Rodiger is, who he works for, and at the beginning he doesn't realise that he's a spaniel as well. This person Celia keeps popping up and trying to accost him, so he needs to resist that for a start. And obviously, we need to have a baddie, so there's a kind of weird mutant hybrid thing. Main thing is, Zach just feels there's something terribly wrong, and he needs to go on a mission. And the only thing he has at the beginning is one of Alice's research reports, which he finds in their apartment, but he doesn't understand it because he didn't like science, he was unconfident about it, he doesn't understand statistics. And his mission really is about deciphering this report, which turns out to, obviously reveal, what the hell's going on and why Alice has disappeared, and etc., etc., etc. So he has this report, and throughout the book, he learns more and more stuff from all of these characters, mainly Milton, it has to be said, from all these weird and wonderful characters, and eventually discovers what the hell is going on. So that's kind of the storyline. I mean, obviously the book's also about fitting statistical models, Bayesian estimation, classical estimation, significance testing, describing data, plotting data, and all the rest of it. But what I'm hoping is that none of the students notice all of that stuff because they're so engrossed in the story. Of course, the other reality may be that the story just acts as tedious distraction from the stats that they're desperate to learn. Who knows? I guess we will know at some point. So, like I said, when I tried to do something like this with the SPSS book, it was very much like story, then a big block of stats, and then a bit of story. So it was all the chapters were bookended with hopefully a bit of light relief, and that was that. Whereas this is very much everything is mixed in. The story and the statistics are completely blended. So to give you a feel for this, this is a scenario where Milton's explaining some probability theory to Zach, and this, please God, don't read it, but this just sort of shows you that there's what's going on here. They've just had a conversation about Milton's past. I think that was probably it was to do with Rodiger, and then it sort of segues into the cat then talking to Zach about probability, and his way into that is to talk about the phone numbers that Zach, or not phone numbers because phones don't exist, but this thing called the Proteus exists instead. So he looks at his contacts on his Proteus and uses that to explain basic probability and sampling of friends from your phone sort of thing. This is another example which text is too small, but again there's a big block of kind of storyline here, and then that segues into some character explaining to him why null hypothesis significance testing is a really bad idea. So it's all completely blended. The examples fit in with the story. So this is the case notes that Zach stole from Alice's therapist, and this is used as a way of explaining what an ordinal scale is, a nominal scale, what qualitative data is, what quantitative data is. So that teaching those things is all embedded in the story that Zach is going through. And likewise, this was an example of teaching Z-scores, where Zach has to cross the bridge of death, which is also known as the probability bridge. And to get across this bridge, you have to solve a bunch of probability problems, otherwise you die. And this was the first of his problems, which was he's faced with this kind of chasm that he has to get across. And the only way he can get across is by jumping on one of two enormous vinyl records that are spinning in space. It's funny, it's only when I start explaining this to other people that I start feeling like it might all be a bit bonkers. Anyway, so he has to decide which of these two discs, which one he has to jump on that he's most likely to survive to get around to the other side. So there's a whole bunch of teaching about Z-scores that's just embedded in this example that's driving the story along. So everything is kind of seamlessly interwoven, hopefully. Now, so that's how it came about and what it is. I just wanted to give you an idea of what kind of workload this was, which is quite hard to do because you don't really keep a check of things. Basically, from the point of having the idea in Rotterdam to the book being published was 8 years, and that was pretty much 8 years of it sort of floating around in my mind, and then probably about 4 years of it consuming vast amounts of my mind. It's difficult to estimate how many hours it took because although I took some unpaid leave, partly to write it and partly because we just had a baby, so I had 3 months of no university work to do. But obviously a lot of the rest of the time I was doing this evenings, weekends, and on top of my day job. So I reckon it was something like 4,000 plus hours. A lot of hours. The book itself is just under 300,000 words. 1.6 million characters. Over 13,000 paragraphs. 20,000 lines. So I reckon this equates to, and that most of that was written in the space of about 2 years. So I had a sort of solid block of trying to really kind of hammer at this. I reckon that's word length wise, it's equivalent of about 60 research papers in the space of 2 years, or probably about the equivalent of 5 or 6 psychology PhD theses. I obviously haven't had to do the research for those papers, but just in terms of pure sitting down and writing stuff. Don't show this to the VC, by the way, because all my head of school, I mean, God, I could have done 60 research papers in 2 years. That's got to be a sackable offence not to do that. What with, obviously, you read stuff as you write, but you have to go through proofs. The book went through 3 revisions. So I reckon I've read something like 1.2 million of my own words. Trust me, that's pretty tedious. My words are not that good. I have a file with stuff, basically a research document of descriptions and ideas and things like that. That had about another 90,000 words in it that were unused or were just there to remind me of what to do. I produced 603 diagrams. They're not all in the book because some figures are made up of lots of graphs or whatever, so that would include sort of individual graphs that made up other figures. But yeah, 600 diagrams, 185 data-related files, about 4,000 lines of R script to create diagrams, produce data sets, all that sort of thing. Basically, it was quite a lot of work. So that's my attempt to try to quantify, my own efforts. What did Sage do? Well, I want to be clear, this book would not have happened without Sage, there's no doubt about it. So they provided me with an opportunity to, they were true to their word, essentially, right? They said you can do whatever you like, and they let me do whatever I like. But one of the important things that they did was, there's a process that goes on in textbook development normally of review and, stuff. I don't know, they do stuff, right? There's a process. We didn't go through that process, so essentially they said, what do you need? I said, some money to get a graphic novel artist and a fiction editor to make sure that, I'm not going to completely humiliate myself with the fiction, and that was probably the most valuable thing, actually. She was amazing. And then beyond that, I basically said, leave me alone and don't ask me too many awkward questions until the end, which is kind of what they did. And then at the end, did a process which I'm sure Mark will then talk about. It wasn't all at the end, but a lot of it was at the end. I like to somehow imagine that how a conversation might have gone with a different publisher if I'd gone up to them and said, well, I've got this idea, I want to do a fictional narrative and embed all the academic content into that. I want to put graphic novel panels in it, and there's going to be a kind of love story, and it's going to be futuristic, and there'll be some stats in there as well, and all the rest of it, and I want a budget, and I don't want you to ask me any questions, and I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing, and I'm not going to tell you the storyline until it's actually finished, and I kind of want it shrouded in secrecy because I'm slightly scared that I'm not actually going to get it done, and it's just going to be embarrassing if everyone thinks I'm doing this thing and then I never actually do it. La-di-da-da. And after that publisher has finished laughing at me and they say, what's the pedagogic reason for doing this? I would just turn around and say, no idea. I just think it'll be kind of fun. It wouldn't go too well, but Sage, like I said, were true to their word. So the book came out last April, I think, maybe May. And it coming out, I have to be honest, left me with a very weird mix of emotions. Because first of all, obviously it was nice to see it done, but primarily I suddenly became very aware of how an idea that I thought was good, a dream that I had, I suddenly realised might actually be a terrible, terrible idea. And that everyone had put a lot of faith in this idea being a good idea, and maybe it was just not. And so I got really terrified, actually. Well, I still am a little bit. I have to try to avoid Amazon as much as possible. So first of all, I was very scared about that. The other thing which really, really surprised me is normally when I write a textbook or update a textbook, I get to the end of it and I'm sick of the sight of it, and you do all the things of vowing that you're never going to go near a textbook ever again because it's so horrific trying to update it or write it. But I really missed writing this for over a 2-year period. Virtually every evening I was sat early into the hours. I like statistics. I've got no friends, so I'd sit into the early hours, with these characters, Zach and Alice and Milton. I was very fond of Milton. And it felt like I had some friends that I could, I've got a wife, I've got small children. It's nice to be able to go up to your study and have some imaginary friends to talk to for 2 years. And, and they were sort of weirdly characters that made you think about life. And, I guess also because what was going, having children and stuff, a lot of that got filtered through. You think about life and what's important, and I guess also because I was trying to write younger characters, it kind of reconnected me a bit to when I was younger and nicer than I am today. So I really missed it. But nevertheless, it's gone. They've gone out into the world, and that's that. Till the sequel. So all I really want to finish by saying is, like I said, I think it's premature to say it's a successful textbook. But it is the thing in my career that I'm definitely most proud and excited about having done. I really started it, I didn't stage this, obviously. I really started it thinking I couldn't do it. You know, like I said, I've never written fiction. It was just like a crazy idea that I wanted to have a bash at. And, you know, I kind of thought I'd be really surprised if this ever actually materialises into a final manuscript. So, you know, I'm very happy to at least have done it. Even if it's a bad idea, I think, well, you know, in the words of Tufty, at least I've done something because it's different, even if that something is rubbish. Over to Mark.
Okay, hello everyone. So first thing to say is you've already had the most interesting part of today's session. I think that's about the third time I've seen you speak about this book, and it's really always fascinating to hear how this idea evolved, and I too am quite amazed that we actually got to this point. The second thing I want to say is I led the team that worked with Andy to bring it to this point, to develop it and launch it. But I didn't do most of the actual work myself. I just said yes or no, actually no quite a lot, and perhaps we better ask Andy. So there's a lot of people who were involved in this at Sage who can't be here today, but we do a much better job telling you how we got to this point. So I'm just going to cover a few things that we did, what our role was in launching Andy's new book, and really just give you a flavour of the challenges that launching something like this brought for us. So before I do that, I'm going to start with some feedback that we've received, and I'm going to give you a warning. It's all really positive, and I suppose it has to be. I'm hardly going to put negative feedback up there, but I just want to say that we know that there are people who aren't going to like this book, and critical acclaim doesn't necessarily mean commercial success, as Andy alluded to earlier. But I think it's important to show this because, in my experience, and I've got about 20 years of experience of launching textbooks, it's very unusual to have this kind of feedback this early. This was just after we published. Perfect for everyone that finds stats difficult, pointless or boring. This book proves them wrong. And by the way, I'm not doing this to flatter Andy either, although if you are flattered, that's great. The way the concepts are explained is so easy to grasp, makes it even entertaining to learn. Really well written and a novel, get it? To get students reading about statistics and research in general. Guaranteed to engage students like nothing else before it. A pedagogic masterpiece. What a textbook. I could not refrain myself from taking a few pictures and sending to friends. I'm sorry, but in 20 years of publishing textbooks, I've never heard of anyone taking a picture of their book, although it does happen with the SPSS book in cats. This is how I wish I was introduced to statistics back in my early days. A masterpiece, again, a masterpiece, not a word you normally associate with textbooks. This one is actually from the person who was the first to adopt it, someone at Leeds. Personally love it to pieces. I wish I had a textbook like this one. When I learned statistics during my undergraduate years, it would have made a world of difference. And then there's this one, which is my personal favourite. This book is a little light in the darkness in my mind. I'm only slightly worried for whoever this person was. It wasn't you, was it? So, really, really good feedback, and really sort of, I think, reflective of the fact that we got something here that we weren't sure about when Andy first came to us with it. Andy, I'm going to embarrass you now. Andy has published 4 books with us prior to this one. Have I missed any? So that one in the top left-hand corner there is our biggest selling book, and I actually think it's the biggest selling European-based social science textbook. I used to work somewhere else a while ago and led research into competing with it. And we did lots and lots of research, spent months and months trying to do it, and ended up giving up because it's just the X factor about it. It's just Andy's voice makes it very, very difficult to recreate. He's also published one on R, which is a very, very, very big selling book too, which you know needs an update. It's getting very old now. That's your next project, right? And a couple of others as well. So when your best-selling textbook author comes to you with an idea, why would we agree to do it? Well, first of all, Andy's our best-selling author, and I don't mean to say that we are simply indulging him in this. That's absolutely not the case. Not even, well, maybe a little bit. It reminds me of a training course I went on when I first joined publishing a long, long time ago. There was a marketing session, and the woman giving it had said that when Delia Smith first got famous for writing her cookbooks, does everyone know who Delia Smith is? She did two really, really successful cookbooks, and they sold millions, and the publisher was very happy. They tried to sign her for a third one, and she said, "I will not do another one unless you let me do a prayer book." And they were like, a bit like the silence when we heard that Wiley had approached Andy. Like, we can't do that, absolutely not, we can't, that's just going to be a disaster. And she said, well, I won't do any more cookbooks. So they did it, and it ended up outselling both the cookbooks. So when your best-selling author says he's got an idea, you better damn well listen, because he's a best-selling author, and there's a reason for that. And as much as we like to say it's all about us, it's not. There are lots of reasons why we do this. Stats is a huge market for us. It's a market we know really well. Those 3 books there have got a huge market share and globally in statistics. So we know it. At the end of the day, this is a textbook. Andy never set out to write anything other than a textbook. Okay, it operates like a textbook. It's just a rethinking of what is a very established and very old model. We do textbooks, we publish about 150 a year. Not all new, some are revisions, but that's how many we're publishing. So it's a huge model, and we know them. We like to think of ourselves as the leading social science methods publisher in the world. And as such, we've got a self-appointed mission to innovate within that space. So when your best-selling author comes to you with what could be a crazy idea, one that we wouldn't even be sure he could deliver, again, we think we should stand up and listen to this. And then finally, what an opportunity for us to learn, because embarking on this meant that we had to rethink what we do and how you traditionally bring a textbook to market. So we came up with a strapline. I think it was us. Was it Ben? A journey into introductory statistics like no other, which I think is pretty accurate, actually. And what that meant was we had to think, what's our journey into launching a textbook like no other going to be? So Andy mentioned just before, actually, we have a very established model for launching new books into the market. Now, that is it. I'm not going to go through it in any great detail, but essentially there is a process behind this. There's a pathway that we follow that leads to generally better success rate of publishing. Now, there's lots of things that can go on, lots of things that go wrong, but essentially this is it. So at the far end there, we've got sort of ideation. So it might be that we come up with an idea for a book, or that an author comes to us with an idea. And then we do all sorts of talking with the market. So that's what this bottom bit is. So this is about us going to people who are teaching the course and saying, we've got this idea for a book, what do you think? How does it match what you currently use? You know, what would it take for you to actually use this when we launch it? Because the thing about textbook publishing is all peer reviewing is essentially marketing. The point of a peer review in a textbook is, well, there's quite a few points, but there's a very big one, which is we would like that reviewer to be a customer, a user of that text at the end of it. And so what becomes very important is that dialogue between the reviewer, the author, and us. And we're kind of the intermediary. So we're saying, we don't cover that topic in your course. Should that be in the book? We have those kind of conversations. And the whole point is the dialogue there. That's very powerful. If you say to someone, thanks for your review, you said this, we think that's a really good idea, we're going to take it on board. That's a very powerful thing for them thinking, oh, actually they took notice of what I said, I'm going to use that book when it launches. That's the theory. As I say, the practice is much more complicated, but every single textbook we publish goes through a version of this. Okay, and the key thing is almost all of our reviewing is with faculty, module leaders, people teaching courses that we want the textbook is designed to be on. So, coming back to Andy's book, the first thing we did was rip that up, because and we didn't get to see the book, anything, until this point here, which is when he delivered it to us and said, right, this is it, over to you. Okay, so none of that could happen. Which meant everything had to be squeezed there, which was a bit like, So yes, we ripped that up. There was another thing that we ripped up as well, and that was talking to faculty. Because, well, they couldn't influence. We couldn't go back to Andy and said, "Oh, this guy doesn't really like chapter 2. Can you rewrite it?" You'd have had a meltdown, really, wouldn't you? So we didn't go anywhere near that. But it's a story. So if someone says, "But you don't cover blah blah," it's like, well, I'm sorry, it's too late. So a lot of that dialoguing that we normally do just simply couldn't happen. But we thought, well, this is a great opportunity, because the whole point of this book is to appeal directly to students. And that meant that we could rethink our entire approach to how we bring this to market. So, we've done some of the other stuff and what we could. We have talked to faculty. I wouldn't want you to go with the impression that we haven't done that. We have. But most of our energy went into talking to students. So, when we got the script, the first thing we did was get it out to students, and we got 2 students in pretty much the day after we got the script to have a look at it and say, what do you think? Because we had no idea what the reaction would be. We had seen it, but we weren't the target market. And that was very, very interesting. Rather than the top down, so what we do is the adoption model is, if you go on a stats course, there will be an adopted text that your module leader will say, you're doing this course, this is the main text. We've flipped that. We haven't gone for that approach. We've said to students, there's a really good way for you to learn statistics if the adopted text is not working for you. And that's actually a very unusual way to proceed, because normally students won't go anywhere near anything that isn't part of required reading. So we adopted a ground-up approach, as we called it. And this is also to capitalise on a trend that we've increasingly seen, particularly since fees came in, that students are becoming far, far more fussy about what they buy, but also far more influential among their peers about whether a book's good, whether they went through a course and felt that students who were about to embark on that course should buy it. And also influential on faculty. You have course feedback, and actually that has huge impact, as I'm sure Andy will tell you. So, 3 things there which we'd never done before. Okay, so it's brand new to us. This is about us learning how we might bring this to market. So this is really our goal. This quote really captures for me what we wanted to get. And this was from someone who did a survey for us for a few weeks after we got the script. It was about 16 students, and we sent them a questionnaire and about the first 5 chapters. Do you know any of this? And so what we wanted was some really good, strong testimonials. And I tell you, we didn't know what we were going to get. They might have all said, oh, yeah, it's great, but I'm not sure I'd use it. So what we were looking for was that early feedback to suggest that, you know what, this is really working for me. I'm learning about stats. I would recommend this, A, to my lecturer, and B, to my peers. So I would recommend this book to my lecturer, as it will help other students to understand the basics they do not have time to go over. I love this second line. Lecturer's time is expensive. Is it? I know it's limited, but whether it's expensive or not, and for them to go to basic information on a one-to-one basis with struggling students seems to be pointless. A great insight into what lecturers should and shouldn't be doing. It makes sense for lecturers to recommend this book to the students before having to tutor on a one-to-one basis. What we wanted, this is a real actual feedback from really early, pre-publication, that we wanted to use in our marketing to faculty, because we weren't sure all faculty would get this. And so we felt if we could have some really good, strong student testimonials saying how helpful they thought it was, that would be influential on considering what is a very radical approach that people might not be comfortable using. It's so different. So, more real-life quotes from the early days, which we wanted to use to influence module leader decisions. Influence peers. So we wanted to really get as much of this as we could to use to influence peers. And then build initial word-of-mouth momentum, because there was no product. Hadn't published, it was in production. We were furiously getting it all together. Andy was furiously going through the proofs to launch it. But while we were waiting for it to physically appear, this is the sort of stuff that we were doing so that we could build our sales tools when we go to faculty. And then, as with all of Andy's books actually, and unusually so, there is a whole social media community around them. And of course this one would be no different. In fact, there's a lot of potential with this one around things like fandom. And so, of course, we have quite an active social media utilising many different options. So when it launched, we put up a quiz, are you a chipper or a clocktorian? Which was, again, just to really start building word of mouth. Video. Andy showed it to you earlier, that's a screen grab of it. We put that out on YouTube, which is obviously where lots and lots of students exist. They're often their first port of call. Books, etc. They ended up running a competition for us in which they could win a copy. And John Smith's, which there's a John Smith's here, isn't there, actually? They did this amazing display, again, just really building student knowledge of this book, really just sort of drawing them in. And as you can see, a lot of the stuff that James did, the cover, all comes through to really give it a strong student-facing brand. And then another thing that's really new for us, so again, the model we use is when a textbook launches, the sales reps go out on campus, they go and see people teaching intro to stats. Say, you know, we've got a new book, how, you know, what are your needs, will it fit your needs, talking to them like that. And we've asked them to ask module leaders to get the book reviewed amongst their students. And here's an early example of that. I don't think she thought it was that good an idea before she took a look. So we've had several instances where some lecturers have been quite sceptical, quite dismissive, have gone ahead and given it to their students, and students have very, very strongly and positively reviewed it. And that has influenced module leaders to think again about whether they should be using this. And then we've got we did a colouring book, which our reps carry around. They leave them all over campus, departments. And it is literally a colouring book. Very clever bit of marketing. And colouring books are really quite popular now, aren't they? The adult ones. So, and we've also got one for the US as well. So, that isn't everything that we're doing. It's too much to really go through today. But we're in this for a long game. This is such a radical departure. I think what I think so wonderful about this is a lot of innovation in publishing now. When you say innovation, you may as well swap the word digital. Okay, and what this is a very, very huge innovation, but entirely within print. It's not to say that we don't do lots of digital stuff around it, but it is entirely within print, and I think that's quite wonderful in the sense of it's not. A lot of people see print as old, and actually this is a really good example where it's a brilliant medium for conveying educational content, and he's just really reworked it. So our focus at the moment is obviously winning adoptions. Now, this is a textbook, right? And for us as a publisher, textbooks need to be adopted. Okay, you can't really make them sustainable or a commercial success if people just go and buy it for their own use. Okay, so our main drive is to continue to get people to want to adopt it for their courses. And what we're trying, in a way that's very unusual, is that we're trying to get it onto recommended lists. So people aren't necessarily changing their reading list or their main text, but what we're trying to hope is that the students see it, they're struggling, they use it, and then they start recommending it, and we build up that momentum from the ground up, so it starts influencing those. Now that's a slow burn. We're seeing some really good results of that, but it's going to take a long time. But then this is a long project for us. We are thinking about what else we can share on social media to sort of help with that. One of the things that we're thinking about is a game around the bridge of death, i.e. some kind of simple graphic thing where you answer questions, and if you get them right, you move forward. And then the other area that we're starting to look into, and there was a paper came out the other day about the effectiveness of comics in teaching and learning, and really to start looking at the academic literature and what is there around storytelling that we might use to help influence potential faculty who might want to use this. Moving away from Andy's book, so the thing about Andy's book is it's quite difficult to scale it. Okay, so we can't suddenly write, like, let's do a whole series of books written as novels, because, believe me, it's a pretty unique undertaking. And so for us, not being able to scale it is fine, okay, but we do want to use it as a springboard to do more student engagement, innovation. And just a very small, quick example of the sort of things that we're doing, and the sort of things that we've learned from sort of talking to students with Andy's book. This book is a strategy book, so a completely different area, a very different kind of market. But that's the cover. So you've got the front cover, you've got the spine, and then you've got the back cover. Now the back cover was designed by students. Okay, so it's very graphical. We published that in December, so we're starting to get a bit of feedback. But as you can see, it's very difficult. There's no blurb. It's all about how you can use the interactive ebook to help with your studies. And then this is a pull-out preface. So it literally unfolds from the book. And you can't see it here, but it's got write, read, and then, I can't remember what that one was. But it's basically telling you how to use the resources. If you've got an exam to write, it will tell you which resources will help you to do that. It's a small example, but it's really about talking directly to students and saying this book will help you in your studies. And that for us is quite a difference in terms of, instead of all of our marketing and all of our energies being directed at faculty. And that's where I'm going to leave it with you. As I say, we launched in May, so we've had just coming up to a year. It has been very good so far. We're very pleased with how it's gone, but it's going to take a lot more work from us, and we're certainly not seeing it as something that we've done and moving on for. This is a very, very live project for us, and a long-term drive to ensure that we can make it as commercially successful as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much for you. So this is what the undefined looks like. The doctoral thesis is a mere pamphlet by comparison. So I'd like to open up the floor now to questions from any of you. Unfortunately, Milton Professor couldn't be here, so Andy will represent him.
I have two questions for Andy and Harry from the medical school. The first question involves, this is an extraordinary, and I almost say one of a kind, and really amazing project. I guess what I'm really interested in hearing about is how you got the first book from you, actually first textbook, rather than this, which is an extraordinary one. And the second thing is just a tiny little thing. Have you considered just talking around Brighton? Have you ever heard of the Catalyst Club? This sort of, you would have a gigantic fan club, and people would buy this in Brighton even if they weren't interested in statistics. If you talked at the Catalyst Club, people would be into it.
Thanks, I've never heard of it. Well, I like the fact it's got cats. The SPSS book is it's a slightly weird story in a way. When I first came to Sussex to do my PhD, I was what are now called teams, teaching the seminar classes for Science Stats module, which was not being taught in no student-friendly way. So I started making up wacky examples and doing my own handouts and things like that. And at the time, a friend was playing squash with Ziad, the guy with the tin phone. And just through that, he was actually, I think so, just maybe paying the friendly friends to find authors, maybe. Actually. And he was like, well, why don't you write up your handouts to be a book? And at the time I was in the second year of my PhD, so I was very flattered that anyone could ask people writing a book. So I signed up. And it turns out writing a book is a lot harder than piecing together your handouts. But, other than that, it was just taking that idea of just having wacky examples. And I think primarily because I was very young when I did it, and unlike now, back then I could really relate to other students because I was a student. So, but that was a big word of mouth thing, wasn't it? I went over the word limit. I ended up doing my own text formatting because essentially the book was going over budget because I'd written way more than I was supposed to have written, so that was kind of a cost-cutting exercise. And it was a big word of mouth, really. I think it was a bit of luck. It was being young, doing something while I was young, and being in the right place at the right time, because textbooks then, in particular, were very stodgy in statistics and much better than on the whole. But from that, I don't think there's any secret recipe.
I think you look at what works and what doesn't, and sometimes it's really difficult to know why, one way or the other. I think, as I said, when I was elsewhere, looking from the outside in, you felt there was a real X factor with your style of writing. There's real connection with students. One of the most unusual things about the big SPSS book is that we know there are people using it in their teaching that don't like it, but sorry, don't like it, but know their students do, and so that is enough for them because it does a job, and that's pretty unusual actually, and I think it's just grown in every edition. When I did come here to Sage Adventure and I saw the sales, I was quite staggered. I'm not joking when I think it's good people selling social science book outside of the US, and that's quite staggering given some of the big ones that come out there. It's just possibly a combination of things, but I think there's a strong authorial voice in it.
Also, I don't necessarily change content, but I think I alluded to this earlier, but whenever a new edition comes round, I've always stockpiled bunch of stuff that I'm dissatisfied. The updates are not like cop-outs of changing screenshots and putting a cover on. I agree with your content planning better. Even if superficially it doesn't seem to have changed. You know, if you look at what's covered, you might think it hasn't changed very much. So we do a lot of rewriting. I mean, I'm in the middle of revising at the moment, and weirdly taken back again how going over chapters that I did 4 years ago, I think my writing style is horrific compared to. It is like the things going back. You know, I mean, I won't even look at my PhD thesis now, which is so embarrassing. But it's that thing, you know, 5 years more experience or 4 years more experience. Hopefully, think you can do a better job and you have more experience in trying to explain things and have better ideas about how to explain things. So I think the only other thing I would add is having that kind of passion and commitment to make it better with every edition, and not just think, oh shit, I've got to update it and how can I get away with doing the least amount of work possible.
Yeah, that's unusual.
Did you ever think about, when you talk about this as a print book constantly, did you ever think about this as being an electronic?
Well, it's available in Kindle.
Yeah, but I mean, but primarily. So is your first thought still that it should be a printed?
We have different answers to this.
The reality is that print still massively outsells all in all areas, fiction, textbooks. It's not that we wouldn't do an E, but print is still the primary medium for people to use in their studies. Now, you know, you can talk about sort of millennials coming through, and that may change and accept that. But I think it's about the blend. And I think when you talk about E, you can't just be reproducing the book. You need to be redesigning it for the medium that you're going to be distributing, and that's something that's very much at the forefront. But right here and now, the first thing is to really get it out as a print book and go from there.
Just thinking, if your marketing is designed the other way around, then it's for students, then actually the majority, I mean, I'm in medicine as well, and primarily it's all. So.
It's interesting because it is the way it works is it's very traditional. It's, you know, you read it as a student, you sort of need to read it in a linear fashion, because the first time you come to it, you're being following a story, and that really suits print. And you know, textbooks are often used. You might start with chapter 5 in the teaching, and go back to chapter 2, and then pop forward to chapter 7. So that tends to suit E a bit better in that sense. And yeah, there's some interesting ones about delivering a novel like this, or not a novel, textbook, narrative.
My answer would be, I think we could do some really amazing stuff. It would take a lot of money.
Yeah, you absolutely could. You could turn this into a complete resource. You've already talked about producing colouring books and quizzes. All that could be. So you're not actually reading a book. You are participating in the learning process. And it's not just a book. And you know, certainly that's something that almost gamification is used in music and medicine.
A good example of where we've done that actually is we've just published a new anatomy and physiology to nurses, and as a direct result of us doing this, we've done a colouring book, and actually colouring in A&P is actually a recognised way of learning about anatomy and physiology, and so that kind of complete bank of resources is something that we're already looking to in other areas. Just, the thing about this is it's such a radical departure. It's taking a lot of energy just to focus on kind of getting people to see that it's really valuable. So you can overload some projects when you launch them. That's why I talk about adding new things in as we go along and do that sort of stuff.
Just because Jules raised this,
I mean, and I absolutely take that, Mark. I can imagine it would be really expensive to turn it into some kind of online resource that you could monetize by subscriptions. But the issue that we've got now, I mean, absolutely now, is that our students are kicking back on buying copies of books because of the amount of money that they're paying. And so the kind of the library to buy a central resource, of course we can't possibly buy the textbooks for every student. So that's where that's coming from. And librarians would absolutely welcome something that we could subscribe to centrally that would allow us to get out to all the students.
And I think, and isn't just a, what is perceived as being just a book. It's got that sort of added learning element.
My question is related to the timeline of the timelines. It seems that it takes a long time to write a textbook or this specific textbook.
All of them. I think this.
And also the timeline afterwards. It seems like this book's been out for a year, and in some of the, I'm doing my PhD now, and a lot of the research that I'm reading, well, I don't use textbooks very often, but like a year is quite old, not old, but it's not necessarily the most updated. So I was surprised to see that a year-old textbook is not necessarily, it's like a very new textbook. What I was thinking is, I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of book sprints. Book sprint is basically a book that is written in 5 days. And it's like this intensive sessions of writing. Apparently they started because no one wanted to write textbooks because it takes so long and they're so specific in it. So they started getting people together to write textbooks in a very short amount of time. And I've been looking into that because I find it very interesting. And I wonder, because of this idea that we've been talking about, the importance of the students' review and students' participation, if it would be something completely out of mind to write a texture with students, maybe not the undergrad students, but like PhD students, are the reasoned users of textbooks. Like, because it seems that both you're quite influenced by the feedback that you would get from it. Is that something that it would be completely insane?
No, it wouldn't be insane at all. I think it's actually pretty, I mean, as I said, the SPSS book, the first edition, I started it simultaneous to writing up my thesis. That was kind of yeah, I mean, I think the older I get, the harder I find it to have any kind of insight into what I'm going to know things. So I think writing with the generation that you're trying to write for is the perfect solution to that. They may not necessarily have the technical skills to articulate the concepts that you want to get across, but what they will have is good ideas about what would engage them, and I guess examples of where it hasn't worked. My students are perpetually confused about confidence interviews, which I don't think is unusual. So they could probably rattle off 10 different examples of bad explanations of confidence interviews for you, from which you can learn an awful lot about how not to explain.
Would that be something?
Sounds great. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of legacy things in publishing. So, we have a long production period from delivery of the script through to publication, and there are lots of reasons for that. One is the sheer volume of projects we've got going. The fact that print, technology is fast improving, but that still goes on a big printing press. And with all the sort of lead up with that, so Andy was mentioning, the authors have to check the proofs, and another thing is that pretty much every single one of our authors is a part-time author. They have day jobs. They're all in universities, and we have very few full-time authors. And so when do you write? Through the night, at the weekend, or just in the office in the morning? I don't know, but it's a very valid question. So, but to take them out of that it fundamentally changes things, and it's not that we shouldn't do it. And I think that's those sort of paying people to write stuff is something that other publishers do more regularly than we do. But I think the thing is, the thing we value about content is the voice behind it, carrying weight. So Andy is a brand, and therefore when he writes has an extra dimension to it that someone who doesn't have that brand doesn't have. The content might be equally good, but there's a missing bit. And so for us, the content is very important because of where it comes from, and especially in the higher education space. So all of these things mean that it becomes much a longer process than we would like it. I mean, every publisher on this planet will tell you that if you could write a book in a week, that would be great because we chuck out books much more quickly. It's just the reality is much more complicated than that.
That's nice.
I have a question about how you approached weaving together the narrative and the statistics content. Do you think that because you'd already written several statistics textbooks, you had a good idea of the sort of classroom material that you wanted to cover, and then weaving the narrative into that notion of what you wanted to cover? Or did you find yourself more in the narrative thread and then pulling things in? So, yeah, I'm just curious how you approached that.
The short answer is I approached it very badly. Learned an awful lot to with about what I should have done beforehand. It's probably a bit of both. The Bridge of Death is a good example. In that chapter, the narrative was almost entirely driven by what I needed to cover academically, and me having this idea I could string lots of examples together around this probability bridge that comes across. So that whole chapter just came from, I thought that these sort of puzzles would be entertaining ways to cover essentially a lot of very dull probability theory. And so at some point I knew, chapter X, whatever it was, he was going to have to go somewhere over the probability bridge. So the academic content drove the narrative quite a lot, but there were situations where I needed stuff to happen narratively, so I ended up sort of shoehorning, or probably shoehorning the examples into. Well, I need a scenario where this is going to happen with these characters. How can I fabricate some data that's going to make that happen? A bit of both. But my point about doing it badly is I thought I'd done loads of planning until I started writing, and I realised that I should have done it at least 10 times more planning than I actually did. I didn't have an ending for some considerable time.
I was just intrigued about why Rotterdam, and did it actually influence your planning?
I had a research colleague there who the University was paid for making. I don't like Hollands, good cheese, good beer.
Yeah, well, as I said, I wondered if it actually influenced the narrative or content at all.
No, so I didn't really start thinking about it in earnest until for a couple of years. Yeah, it's one of these, the things that sit in the back of your brain, and then while you're having a shower or something, things are like popping up. It was like that for a few years. It was really only when I signed the contract, probably about 4 years after I was in Oxford, that I started thinking about opportunity to properly some things like that. I don't know, maybe I should go back and read it and see if there's any subliminal where cheese appears a lot, or cube-shaped beans.
Well, actually, it's an interesting question. There are very few gaps left, but that doesn't mean that you can't shoehorn stuff in. In fact, I don't think genuinely there are any gaps for content in most textbooks. It's just bringing out more innovative or better text, whatever that might be, and also for what digital your brain is bringing as well.
Thank you very much. Well, before all of these happen to the community, I just want to promote the next Hive seminar, which is the 23rd of March, and that's on developing and simulating research on social media with Dr. So thank you to all of you. A huge thank you to Andy and Mark.